Okay, we have Robert Bob Burns here today. We're at the Evansville Wartime Museum with a P47 sketch in the background. And Bob Burns has a lot of stories to tell about some of his family members and the P47. So Bob, tell us your birth date and where you're from.
Okay, my birth date is...
Speak loudly into here.
Oh, okay. It'd be December the 19th, 1932.
So you're now 88.
89, and
89.
I'll be 90 at the end of this year.
All right. And then you have told us some stories here today about your father and your grandfather. Can you tell us, we're here at a P47, Evansville Wartime Museum, and we're emphasizing some things on World War II and what Evansville did in World War II, and Bob's family has done a fair amount of things. Can you go over in categories what they did and during what era?
Well, it's mainly my father. He worked for Cervell in Evansville, and he stamped out parts for the wings of the P47, so possibly some of his parts may be in the wing of that airplane sitting downstairs that he worked on and helped make.
So Cervell made a lot of the wings here that we see on our planes. Our P47 here, we made 6,000 planes. That means 12,000 wings. And then in Farmingdale, New York, they made 8,000 planes, and that means 16,000 wings. And a lot of the wings were made here at Cervell, where his dad worked, and put in boxes and shipped by train up to Farmingdale.
A lot of them went right on the flatbed of trucks and right out to the plant here at Evansville.
On the flatbed right here to the Republic Aviation. Because here at Republic Aviation, our blue building down the block here, 1 million square feet under roof, we made one plane every 2.5 hours. We made 10 planes a day, and so they had to have made 10 planes a day. There were 20 wings that were delivered there every day. Tell us a little stories that your dad would say, Bob. Did he say any stories about things?
My dad wasn't a real talker about that, but so he kind of kept things to himself on that. He was busy, and the hours they worked, I didn't see my dad too often. When he came home, he was pretty tired, and they didn't get a day off. At that time, everybody worked 7 days a week, and I can't remember the hours, but usually they were long. So my parents didn't have a whole lot to say. We lived in the government housing project here that was built for the war workers. It was Gatewood Gardens, if anybody would remember that, out off of 41, and I guess I was at Morgan Avenue now. I've been away from this place a long time. This is an experience being back in Evansville today. I haven't been here in many years.
Yeah, Gatewood Gardens, if you think of what happened here in Evansville, we had 18,000 factory workers in about 1941. In 1943, we had 80,000 factory workers. So where did they all live? They built housing for about 1,800. That left housing, the need of housing, for close to 50 to 60,000 people. So your family was lucky to find a place. A lot of that housing is still in existence. It was supposed to be just made temporarily, but it's still in existence. Gatewood Gardens is, I think, still around. You can go look on Garvin and see if it's there. It may not be, but I haven't checked Gatewood, but we have a map downstairs where all these things were, and I'll show you that map. And I'll bring it up for our video too to explain that. So he would probably take a bus to work or walk to work or something at Cervell or at Republic Aviation, I assume.
I think, well, we did have a car at that time, so he had the A sticker. I believe he could get gas for the car. So
gas, and
as far as I know, he was still driving to work.
Yeah. Did Mom work at the factories or not?
No, my mother ended up working downtown at the Woolworth's store, I guess, that had a fountain type arrangement, and so she worked there. So everybody worked, and I had a job too. I worked for the greenhouse down the street, and we made, what, 10 cents an hour? That was a big deal, you know, back then.
So
I paid my own way.
So you were about 9 when the war started, 13, 14 when the war ended. So a lot of children worked at that time, would work after school or on weekends. A lot of kids would not go to school sometimes in the afternoon when they were juniors and seniors and work. So that's very common. 10 cents an hour. He worked at the florist or at the greenhouse. Food production was important. His mother worked at Woolworths. We had a Woolworths department store and a fountain down there for many, many years. I was a kid back in the 70s, 80s. It probably torn down in the 70s or 80s, but it was a very big department store, drugstore, and there was a fountain that stretched around half that building, and they made good food. That's where Mother worked. A lot of women in World War II could sometimes double their, triple their salary from moving from restaurant business or waitress business to go being a welder or a rosy riveter. So many women jumped out of those jobs to other jobs, but because your dad had a job, it wasn't necessary. Did you have any brothers or sisters during that time, and did they work?
No, I had a sister, but she left in the early part of the war and moved to California. So I was kind of, at that time, an only child.
Yeah. And what school did you go to? What grade school did you go to? Baker?
I went to St. Joseph's.
St. Joseph's, yes. Yeah, my mother went there. St. Joseph's at Garvin and about Virginia Street, a big yellow roof. Dr. Father Kelly made that big yellow roof. The church is still there, St. Joseph's. It was really sort of downtown for Evansville at that time. It's in the place called Jimtown, and that's in the center where Cervelle and a lot of factories were too. So people could live there and walk to work or get to work pretty easily. So St. Joe was a big church and up to 800,000 students at one time. So you're one of the students there. It was a very good school. My mother went there and she loved it. She born in 23, so she's 9 years older than you. But she lived on Florida Street, right down in Garvin, past Ronnie's Fruit Market there. Now, then did you grandparents or anything from here or live here or work in the war at all there, Bob?
No, they were farmers up in Dale, Indiana, and that's where I guess I was spending most of my time until we moved down to Evansville. So,
did your mom and dad live up in Dale?
Well, originally Terre Haute, and I guess from Terre Haute my dad moved to Evansville and got the job, and we went on and lived on the farm at that time until eventually he found a place for us to live down here.
So that's very common. Dale, a lot of these towns east of Evansville, also down in Kentucky over to Illinois, we had a catchment of close to 50 to 60 miles where people would actually get on buses and cram on buses and come to the city of Evansville to work. Just think of 80,000, close to 60,000 new workers in Evansville. They a lot of times lived out with their grandparents or their families because there was not enough room and boarding in Evansville. So what happened with Bob and his family is they stayed with grandparents in Dale. A lot of people stayed over in those places like Dale or Hatfield, and buses were just packed taking carpool people to Evansville to work. Then they were lucky to find housing in Evansville. That's not very common. I haven't talked to very many people that got housing, so you were lucky to get housing. So they got housing here in Evansville, and that would have been from probably 42 to 45 or so. But also what Bob is saying, his dad came down from Terre Haute to get work. Evansville, World War II transformed Evansville because it was the end of a recession. We had Chrysler here that was a big company here that made cars, and they came in 1935. But across the country, we were still in a recession from 1929 all the way till 41, till the war started. So occupation was very important. So a lot of people, it's a social change where people came from, say, Terre Haute, from Dale, from other places, and a lot of them, inertia, they had a job and they stayed here. So he went to school here at St. Joe, and Mom and Dad stayed here for a while. I don't know if they stayed a longer time or not.
Well, they stayed until they both died.
So but they were from Terre Haute. Where was Mama from? Terre Haute too?
Well, she was originally from, well, I guess St. Myron area where she was born.
What was her maiden name?
Hoblein.
Hoblein.
Very German family.
Yeah, because my family's from there. It's Borehole from St. Myron. Hoblein, I've heard that name. A lot of Germans up there, and St. Minor people would come down here too. That's a pretty big jaunt. It's an hour and a half drive. In today's world, it'd probably be 2 hours at that time. But so they were both southwestern Indiana people, but they ended up migrate in Evansville, and because of the war, they had jobs, and because of the war, the jobs were over after the war, but they stayed here, and that happened. It was a social change. A lot of people in Evansville have Kentucky roots, Southern Illinois roots, Southern Indiana roots, because they had a job in Evansville during World War II, so it migrated and changed a big population in Evansville. So Bob is a result of a lot of these things we talked about. Where you live at now, Bob?
I live at a little place on the Ohio River called Mockport, Indiana.
Okay.
It's south of Corydon. That kind of gives it a little help as far as location.
So Rockport's a famous town on the Ohio River. They just created a Lincoln boat, a Lincoln flatboat.
No, Mockport.
Where is Mockport?
It's south of Corydon, Indiana, the original capital.
Corydon,
Straight
okay.
down on the Ohio River.
Near Leavenworth?
Leavenworth, yes. We're about 15 miles from Leavenworth.
Near, so another one starts with an M, Maxton or?
Mockport.
Mockport. There's another one that they built a lot of log cabins on, right downriver from Corydon. But so Mockport, Corydon, where he's talking about, Mockport's not too far from Louisville, so he lives over there. Corydon was our first state capital down the Ohio River in Harrison County.
Right.
So, what'd you do for a living, Bob?
Well, I guess when I got out of high school, the Korean War was happening. So I ended up enlisting in the Air Force. I did my 4-year hitch in the Air Force, and that's another whole story. But after that, I worked for Martin Aircraft for 6 years in flight test. And then I got an invitation to join NASA. So I spent my last 34 years with NASA, falling out of the sky at odd angles with a lot of the astronauts and test program.
Wow. What a heck of a career. What a heck of a career. So, always into aviation. So he was enamored with our, what's called Hoosier Spirit 2. Hoosier Spirit 1 was the first one that rolled off our places. The P47 rolled off in September of 1942. And this is Hoosier Spirit 2, rolled off in 44, 45. And he got a chance to look at it. What was your thoughts about when you saw the plane that your dad probably made the wings of? Can you tell us your thoughts about what you thought about that plane?
Brought back a lot of memories. Loved the airplane. I think I had Pratt & Whitney 2800 sounds embedded in my mind that I'd never forget. You know, I could pick that sound out of my sleep.
It's such a loud engine, and it's such a unique loud engine. So from 42 to 45, after they made 6200, every time they'd make it, they had a test pilot flying over everywhere in Evansville. So test pilots would fly around here. So everybody in Evansville learned the sound of a P47. Very loud.
Yeah. Well, my best buddy, his dad was one of the production test pilots that did that.
What was his name?
I can't remember. I'm not positive, but I think his last name was Boyd, B-O-Y-D. But my memory for that far back, I just really having a tough time on that.
We have a list of the test pilots that did that. If you think about it, so you made 10 planes a day. Every plane had to be tested. The first thing you do is check the brakes on the plane. You check the magnetics. Then you would check the sights on the gun. We'd shoot the guns into the hill near Sunset Cemetery. Then the test pilots would go up, and I think we had only 3 accidents at the most of all 6,200 made here. So it's very rare to have a problem in our planes. Then the WASP, the women pilots, would fly them to different destinations. Many of them went to George Field up there near Lawrenceville, Illinois, and many fields other places around here, and so they would take them to different places. But his best friend's dad was a test pilot, so that was pretty rare to have that around here. But we about 6 years ago, we had a big event. We had 250 people on top of the old National Bank here at one of our events. We had a reenactment on the river, and we saw the LST, which is the only one left in the world in Evansville, out of 1,100 made, over 1,100 made, and the only ship out of 7,000 at D-Day is right here in Evansville. It's the only one left that's floating. But that day we had a reenactment on the river, and we had 250 people on top of our old National Bank building looking down the river. Then we had 2 P-47s fly by, within earshot, within probably a half a mile. And we had 25 World War II veterans, and we were explaining about the planes, and all of a sudden there was all silence. the noise that Bob is bringing up, it was a reflection of time for those people and brought back a memory, like the sense of smell, but the sense of sound, the sense of sight, and there wasn't a dry eye in the place because they heard the sound that they remembered from 42 to 45, either here in Evansville or somewhere. But the sound of a P47 is so loud, you'll never forget that. It's a 2,000 horsepower engine, an R20 2800 made by Pratt Whitney, and just a fabulous engine and a fabulous airplane. And he's been in aeronautics over 34 years, or more like 40 years, so he knows how well it was constructed, and to construct that many that fast is amazing. What are your comments about the museum and about what we're trying to do here and what we're trying to memorialize?
Well, I think it's pretty fabulous. The younger generation really doesn't have much of a clue about World War II, and the way history is being taught today, it's not being, not factual as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Well, that's what we're trying to do, is get in the next generation. If you don't know where you came from, you don't know where you're going to go. And that's one of our models here, and one of our models is to try to educate the next generations. And this was the most important historical event that ever happened in Evansville. And his mom, Bob himself, his dad were all involved in that. And that's why his roots came from Evansville, because of what happened in World War II. Otherwise, his dad wouldn't have had a job at another place. He'd probably been back in Terre Haute. And no, he was here. He was here at the Cervelle, which got 6 E awards during World War II. It was one of our best and biggest factories. Made just refrigerators prior to World War II, and they made all kinds of things during World War II. But Bob, say give us your mom's first name, maiden name, and last name, then give us your dad's first name, last name, middle name, last name, and their place of birth, and then your sister's name.
Okay. My mom's first name was Lucille, and Mary is a middle name, and Halbleib was her family name. And of course, with German family, everybody on that side of her family, they all still spoke German. So as a kid growing up, I learned enough German. They wouldn't tell me, but I learned enough to know what they were talking about, and I wouldn't tell them that I knew. My dad's name was Ernest, and his middle name was Thomas, and of course Burns. And his family was all on the Irish side of the, family. And of course, the Irish were not looked on too favorably back in that era. I think they were still kind of living the immigration type business. The Germans had been over here long enough that they didn't get picked on too much, but the Irish got picked on pretty good.
And then your sister, you remember anything
My
about
sister's, she was a little bit older than me when she left. Hilda Burns. Don't remember what her middle name was and all.
what part of California did she move to? And she married a soldier?
No, she wanted to become a movie star.
Yeah.
so she just took off, I guess, when she got old enough to do that.
Yeah.
And last I lost track over there, it was in the San Francisco area.
Well, we're glad you came today. Your stories are great for us. We might put them up on YouTube. We'd like you to become a member here and send some other people from Mockport here and from Corydon, and we'll take some of our brochures. We'll give you some to spread out over there. And very important history for Evansville, important for the United States. And this is one little cog in the wheel of the historical things that happened when the industrial infrastructure won World War II. And this is just part of that industrial infrastructure. And Bob Burns, it's glad to have you here and glad your family was part of this during World War II. Any other comments about the museum or about what we can do better here?
Well, I just feel fortunate that I grew up in the era that I did, because it was the history. And I hated the history as a kid growing up, like most of us. I don't know about you. I didn't like history. I had to memorize all these dates. But as I got older, and then looking back at what I grew up in, and history I got fascinated with World War II. And my library probably looks a lot like yours out here. I always felt my house was going to tilt off to one side with the weight of all the books.
Well, if you ever want to donate some of your books to us or loan some of them, we're going to loan ours out. We're getting them all registered. We have 2,300 books right now, given by people like you that are, you know, read so many books. Many of them are out of print now. But whenever I have to give a talk, I use our library, and it's the best library in Evansville for any war history. You ever come here and rent them if you need to. We're not checking anything out yet, but we will. But you've been a real pleasure for us today. Thank you very much, Bob.
Thank you for asking me.
Let me see if I can turn this thing off.